Ohio State's matchup with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights is almost here. On Thursdays, we get the preview you've been waiting for to learn all about the Buckeyes' next opponent. Today, we learn all about Rutgers, the quarterback situation, their depth on defense, and some interesting details that surround this football team. You don't want to miss this fun episode of Locked on Buckeyes.
You are Locked on Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked on Buckeyes for the Locked on Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Thursday, September 29th in the year 2022. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I would also like to thank you for making Locked on Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. On today's episode, we will be joined by Greg Patuto. He is the managing editor of OnTheBanks.com. That is the SB Nation site covering the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, as we get to learn all about the Fighting Greg Schianos and what Rutgers is doing in 2022. Now, you may look at Rutgers at a glance and quickly look at their schedule, 3-1. That's great. You may say, oh, this is a different football team. They might go to a bowl game once again and not be a fill-in like they were last year. But then when you talk to someone who covers the team and you look a little bit closer, you might say, oh, this team might be a little bit different than I thought they were when I quickly looked at their record. So, Greg Patuto was here with us, managing editor of OnTheBanks.com. Him and I had a fun conversation, and he gave us his honest opinion of what he's seen, what he's witnessed, his own belief as a football fan and analyst. And I loved every second of my conversation with Greg Patuto. And trust me, this is the preview you've been waiting for, a fun way to look at this weekend's game with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And joining us now here on Locked on Buckeyes, it is Greg Patuto. He is the managing editor of OnTheBanks.com. That is SB Nation site covering the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Greg, welcome to Locked on Buckeyes.
Thanks for having me, Jay. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
No problem at all. The Buckeyes know Rutgers is an opponent that even like the betting lines agree with Ohio State fans believe this game should not be close. But the record might say otherwise. You look at Rutgers and their record, they're currently 3-1 on the season, and they have Greg Schiano, former Ohio State coach, D coordinator, defensive coach that is now running Rutgers once again. What has been the story of this year for Rutgers so far to this point in the year?
I tell you what, even after a 3-0 start, obviously 3-1 after the loss to Iowa, it's been a lot of ups and a lot of downs. It started off on a high note with a road win against Boston College. That really got fans in the right direction, kind of viewed as a game that Rutgers wasn't supposed to win on the road. That got it off to a hot start. Obviously, Wagner being, one of the mediocre FCS programs in the nation. That game was kind of thrown out. And then you look at their performance against Temple as a big favorite, despite the game being in Philly. Very underwhelming performance from Rutgers offensively. The defense has been strong to this point, but kind of underwhelming. They let Temple hang around, won that game by 2 points. So there's been a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And then obviously going into Big Ten play, Iowa was able to score twice on defense and really take the air out of a sold-out crowd in front of Rutgers. So definitely been a lot of highs, been a lot of lows. Greg Schiano has this group believing. He has them playing hard, and they trust what he's built. And right now they're halfway to a bowl berth, and I feel like that's what fans are kind of keening on to, looking at the schedule, seeing if they could find 3 more wins.
It's going to be tough. The Big Ten East is no slouch, but it's also possible. And you have 3 wins already winning your non-conference games. That's a huge stepping point for a program in Rutgers that's not known for having success on the football field. If they can start to build something and continue to believe what Greg Schiano is preaching, this team next year, the year after, could find themselves getting multiple or consecutive bowl berths, which is a step in the right direction, I do believe, for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's kind of where Greg Schiano has it going in recruiting, in meetings, training camp, and then obviously into the regular season. His first season back in 2020, they won 3 games, and that felt like a big improvement in that only Big Ten schedule, obviously, with the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic. And then going into last season, they beat Syracuse on the road. Coming into this season, beginning the year with a win against Boston College on the road, it has fans kind of believing that the program is going in the right direction, but at the same time, being in the Big Ten, which is the class of college football, along with the SEC, there's still long ways to go. So these next couple of years are definitely going to be important, especially in recruiting as he continues to get his guys in the building.
It will be important. Speaking of recruiting and getting his guys in the building in future success or current success, it all starts at the quarterback position. You can't have any success on offense without having a competent quarterback that can get things done. Describe some things going on with the quarterback position at Rutgers, because I know some fans might be looking and saying, wait, there are multiple guys that are playing, hearing maybe some issues, maybe some injuries. What's going on with that position for Rutgers?
The perfect segue there when you talk about recruiting into the quarterback position for Rutgers, because you look at Gavin Wimsatt, who was the highest rated quarterback recruit in Rutgers program history coming in. He enrolled last year at the age of a high school senior, was able to get his feet wet a little bit, played in that Gator Bowl when Rutgers took the spot for Texas A&M when they had to bow out. And then coming into the season, he was in a quarterback battle with Evan Simon and with Noah Vedral, who started the previous 2 seasons as a transfer from Nebraska. We've yet to see Vedral, as he's been injured the first 4 games. He continues to progress, but remains a game-time decision. And Gavin Wimsatt also was unavailable for Iowa. They both dressed, but neither getting in the game, both game-time decisions entering this week. And you look at someone like Evan Simon, who, including the 4 games this year, has appeared in just 10 games over the course of his career. So a very raw player, very inexperienced player. So when you look at the Rutgers quarterback room, it's a mixture of injuries and inconsistencies. And what I mean by inconsistencies is Gavin Wimsatt, when he has played, has shown a little bit of an inability to throw the football. He's got 2 interceptions this season, just 1 touchdown, but he uses his legs very well. A player like Evan Simon has shown to be more of a pocket passer, stronger arm, not a kind of guy that can make every throw, but a better option from the pocket than Wimsatt, but he's not as mobile. So Rutgers has been trying to use both quarterbacks to this point in different situations based on what they're doing on that drive. And to me, it's going to be interesting to see when Vedral returns, because, again, he was the starter the previous 2 years, but he's missed the first 4 games.
Do you think that 2-quarterback system that they're using right now is sustainable?
As more of a classic guy, I don't see it being successful. In terms of being sustainable, I do think it can work over the course of a season if guys are healthy. But I don't think that's a way to be successful. But again, looking at this Rutgers quarterback room, it's interesting because they don't have that one guy that you can just hand the keys to and say this is his offense. Again, they all do different things well, and none of them really do everything great. So the kind of position that they're in, I could see it being sustainable. But in terms of success, that's also obviously going to go with the offensive line, which is a new unit, and they're going to continue to gel. But when you look at Simon, Wimsatt, and Noah Vedral, whenever he gets in there, the success might take some time if there is any. It might be few and far between, but I think that's what you're going to see over the course of the season.
The Buckers. Wow, I'm way off. I don't know why I thought Butler and Rutgers at the same time, and Buckers comes out. The Rutgers rushing attack is one. As you look at the numbers briefly, there's multiple guys that have over 100 yards rushing on the season. Kyle Monungai, I never say his name correctly. I think I got it right that time. Yes. Leads the way with 157 rushing yards on the year. And then Samuel Brown, Salome, Langan, and Wimsatt also have 100 yards on the ground for the season. What's the rushers? I cannot talk. What is the Rutgers rushing attack like, and how would you describe it this season?
So far, it's been solid. It's been really consistent, and it's been the strength of this offense, which wasn't really expected coming into the season. Rutgers lost Isaiah Pacheco, obviously with the Kansas City Chiefs now, who was such a big part of the offense in the backfield for the past 3 years. We saw a little bit of Kyle Monungai last year, and Aaron Young as well, who's also missed the beginning of the season with an injury. So he hasn't even been thrown into the mix yet. And they're using Monangai. He's considered their starter if we had to tag an RB1. But Samuel Brown has started to get some more carries as a freshman. He's a little bit of a bigger back that they like to use. And then along with Al-Shadi Salam, who's more of a speedster, more of a raw player, but they like to use his speed in different ways. So I've been impressed with the Rutgers rushing attack. They have 6 guys who have had 10 carries this season. That doesn't include Aaron Cruikshank, who might be the most explosive player within the offense. And obviously we know what he could do in the return game. So the consistency of the rushing attack, it's been there and they've been able to show signs. But the problem is, again, with this Big Ten gauntlet, if you fall behind, that takes away your ability to run the ball a little bit.
Has Cruikshank been a difference maker so far this year?
He leads the team in receiving. He's got 18 catches on the year, which is 10 more than the guy in second place, Shameem Jones. He is that explosive player, and he's a legitimate difference maker if they can get the ball in his hands, which they like to do in many ways. He came in as, again, a little bit more of a raw talent at wide receiver, obviously an All-American kick returner, and that was what he was brought to do. But Sean Gleason really saw him as an option more than that, and they've developed him into a really talented wide receiver and a guy who they use on jet sweeps. They could hand the ball to him, they could trust him in those big situations. So using his speed, I mean, he's got it. He's got elite level speed, so they're trying to use it whenever they can.
That's what they have to do. On the other side of the ball here, before we start getting more matchup specific and getting some more predictions about what Rutgers might do in this game, the first thing that pops out to me on defense is that the Rutgers front is defense as a whole is only giving up 56.5 yards on the ground per game, 1.8 yards per carry. That's crazy, man. That's just insane. We discussed Greg Schiano. We know what he's done in the NFL, know what he's done in college, but being able to get youngsters to believe in what he's preaching this time around at Rutgers, but this time also being able to get things done defensively that are at an eye-popping number that I understand it's early in the year and I'm still figuring out what a lot of teams are in college football, including what Ohio State can be down the road. You're only allowing college teams 56.5 yards per game on the ground rushing. That's really impressive.
Yeah, the defensive line came in with depth, and that was an area that Greg Schiano talked about a lot during training camp coming in, is that depth along the defensive line. And he even said at times they have 7 or 8 guys that he trusts to shuffle in and out over the course of a game. And they've showed it in the rushing attack. The first 3 games, they gave up 97 yards combined. Iowa was able to get a little bit going, but still rushing for 140 yards. I feel like in a college football game, you'll take those numbers. Maybe you shoot for a little bit less. But they've been able to really plug the middle. It's a testament to their linebackers as well, who have played above their expectations, I would say, to this point. But you look at the options along the line. Wesley Bailey, Aaron Lewis is a player that Schiano developed and believed in. He transferred home from Michigan after his first season there. So a player that Rutgers has liked and has developed. They've gotten some transfers in. Keontae Hamilton is another highly touted recruit that is just starting to blossom on the field. So they have the guys at defensive line. Again, it's going to be interesting to see as Big Ten play begins if they can sustain it. But the defensive line is proving the depth that they had coming in.
Has that been a surprise for you this year with how well they have been up front?
Against the run, I would say it's a little bit of a surprise because that also has to do with the play at linebacker, plugging up the holes. And that was one of the positions where some huge losses. When you look at Olakunle, Fatukasi moving on, Tyshawn Fogg moving on, they lost a lot of names in the middle of that defense. But Deion Jennings has been the player to really step up. He's second on the team. He's got 28 tackles, double digits the last 2 weeks. He's been a huge boost to the linebackers. And Tyreen Powell was the big name coming in, the player that they expected to take on more of a leadership role. And he's showing that as well. He's third on the team in tackles, and he's been able to get to the quarterback with 2 sacks. So I'm not as surprised as I am with the defensive line, but the play at linebacker has been good, still not great, not perfect, but I would say it's better than expected.
Better than expected. That's a big thing to say and a good thing going into a game with Ohio State, where the Buckeyes just ran for over 250 yards against Wisconsin, and Ohio State's probably going to try to have more success on the ground. Rutgers will need their linebackers to play big and to be really make a difference in this game. Seeing that they're playing better than expected is big. Do you think they're ready, those linebackers specifically? Do you think they're ready for the task of what's going to happen on Saturday against Ohio State?
We're going to find out quickly.
Yeah.
It's always difficult to talk. It's always fun to talk during Ohio State week because, I mean, the talent gap is it's so extreme. And that's not even necessarily a complete knock on Rutgers because Ohio State is they're one of the clear top 3 teams in the nation this year. So there's many teams that they're miles ahead of. I would even say in terms of Michigan and Clemson right now, rounding out the top 5, I mean, Ohio State is still far ahead of them. Looking at this game, I think Rutgers needs to just go in physical, try and play physical and try and play tough. And I think that's where Greg Schiano's going to have them, which is the good thing, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Just go in and try and hit somebody. Try and play physical. Just basically just show you're not scared and, see where it goes because, Ohio State's they're going to be guns blazing from the first play. So it's going to be interesting to see how the front holds up there, and especially with Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams, the way that Ohio State has been using their dual threat in the backfield.
With Ohio State's offense being one that can attack you and hurt you in numerous ways as a defense, may it be in the passing game, may it be in the running game, or the use of the tight end, defensive coordinators have an interesting job. Are they going to be full of pressure and allow it to be man-to-man coverage, which I don't think is wise, or is it going to be, hey, let's drop 7, let's drop 8, maybe even drop 9 back into coverage and allow Stroud to have a crazier cloud of players to throw the ball into? Well, it's really hard to figure out what's going to happen. So from your own experience covering this team this year, would you expect Rutgers to bring pressure or to not bring pressure in the first half of this game, or kind of 3 options: bring pressure, not bring pressure, or mix it up and to kind of confuse Stroud and so he doesn't really know what's coming next on the play?
I could see a little bit of a mix coming into this game. Again, whatever you throw at Ohio State, they're going to adjust, and I feel like that's where Greg Schiano is going to have to match the intensity of Ryan Day as well. They're going to have to play chess in this game, and Greg Schiano is going to have to play a really better game if he's going to want to do that. Because, again, if you pressure Stroud, you leave those guys in the Rutgers secondary exposed. And if Jackson Smith and Jigba doesn't play in this game, Ohio State still has plenty of options in that offense. When you look at what Marvin Harrison Jr. has been able to do, or Egbuka has been able to do, they have so many weapons and so many ways they can beat you. So I think they're going to have to sit back and try and drop guys into coverage, because the secondary of Rutgers has been their strength coming in. When you look at guys like Christian Izien, leads the team in tackles. He was and been an all-conference selection. Shaquan Loyal's been good. He had a pick 6 in that Temple game to really spark them. And Robert Longerbeam's been another developmental player. I've said the word developmental a lot because Rutgers is still in that stage where Greg Schiano is trying to develop his guys that he brings into the building. They've all been pleasant surprises. So it'll be interesting to see, but Rutgers is certainly going to have to adjust, because I feel like if you pressure, the wide receivers are going to have a field day. If you sit back in coverage and give Stroud time, he's going to pick you apart. So I feel like it's a double-edged sword. There's really no winning.
My biggest thing about dropping 7, well, probably going to be 7, but if you drop 8 guys, is you're going to allow the running backs to get loose. And I don't think most offenses in the country can have the attack to where your passing game gets slowed down, but then you can run the ball, or your running game gets slowed down, then you can pass the ball, or you want to pass the ball to the receivers, but they're getting locked up, so you pass the ball to a tight end, or you may want to start using the running backs. Like, most teams don't have the luxury Ohio State has on offense. So whatever formula we may predict, that might be what Rutgers does. But Greg, as we have seen so far this year, Ohio State offense can attack you in so many ways. You're gonna have a headache trying to figure out how you can stop this team.
You just laid it out perfectly right there. That's why Rutgers they're going to go in with their plan, and you're going to have to try to adjust accordingly. And I mentioned the linebacker play. They better be up to it, because they're going to have a lot of responsibilities, whether it's plugging up the run or trying to guard a tight end, guard a running back out of the backfield. So it's going to be a lot of adjustments on the fly.
I would personally feel more comfortable, because I'm not the biggest fan of a 2-quarterback system. I understand what Michigan did last year, and Harbaugh went away from that this year so far.
Yeah.
So I'm not the biggest fan of it, because I do think it causes not only, I want to say, confusion with the players, because they may understand what's going on. one of the guys is not going to get into a rhythm. And we saw, I think it was McCarthy last year. There was numerous times when he ended up fumbling. I know I'm going to the Michigan route, but he was fumbling the ball, and they were like, well, it's hard for him to get into a rhythm. If you're coming in spot duty, 1-2 plays coming out, you can't get into a rhythm. And so a 2-quarterback system in Rutgers, or whatever you wanted to describe what's going on with that part of the team right now, it's hard for guys to get into a rhythm. And so that might be the downfall of the team if Rutgers goes with this 2-quarterback system this week, is because, well, all of a sudden, one guy gets into the rhythm, then he comes out. Another guy comes in, he gets into a rhythm, he comes out. So you get warmed up, then you're cold. You get warmed up, then you're cold. That's not a formula you want to utilize, to me, if you want to attack this Ohio State defense, which has played way better than I think anybody would have expected them to play in 2022.
I agree. I've never been a fan of that at any level, using multiple quarterbacks. And it's funny you mentioned that, because Rutgers started out the season with in that Boston College game on the first series, 3-and-out. They gave it to Johnny Langan on the first play of the game. He ran a quarterback run. Gavin Wimsack came in, handed the ball off on second down, and then on third down, Evan Simon threw an incomplete pass. So you saw 3 different quarterbacks on the first 3 plays of the game. Now, obviously, that's not how they've run the offense the entire season. They're going series by series, but I've not even been a fan of that. And the way Michigan's done it, I didn't watch them as closely last year.
Right.
But coming in this season, giving McCarthy and McNamara 1 game, and now it looks like McCarthy's been handed the keys, that was a little bit even more of a way that I would have preferred Rutgers to even do it. When you look at their schedule, Wagner and Temple are on it. Try some quarterbacks out, because, like you said, nobody's getting into a rhythm, and they don't have the guys that – they don't have McNamara or McCarthy walking through the door, guys that could kind of turn it on whenever they want. They have guys that need to get into that rhythm and need to have the confidence and the trust to run the offense.
Yeah, man, the 2-quarterback thing, I know when I was younger watching football, even just as a fan before I became covering Ohio State, I was like, no, I don't like it. It doesn't make sense. And there were teams – I think the Buffalo Bills specifically used to use 2 quarterbacks. No, it's not a way to be successful, which is why that team never had deep playoff runs. It's just not a thing to do if you want to be successful. Now, it worked for the Wolverines last year. I don't think it would have been something Harbaugh could have done consistently over the next few years if he wants to go and win the national championship, which I don't think is going to happen. But still, I know I'm talking Michigan a lot on this podcast because they did that, and I'm glad and they went away from it. And it's a great connection to what Rutgers is doing right now. Greg Patuto, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. What are some final thoughts you have about this game coming up this weekend between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Rutgers Scarlet Knights?
My final thoughts have just been trying to think about how Rutgers is going to attack this game. Because, again, we've seen in the past, Ohio State puts it away early. The game's over at the end of the first quarter, and then obviously into halftime. Been very, very lopsided. And we've seen Rutgers throw some trickery at Ohio State, try and open up the playbook a bit, do some different things. So I'm curious to see if that happens. Heading into the Iowa matchup, Greg Schiano did say they played it a little close to the vest in non-conference, and they were planning to open it up. That did not happen in Iowa with their level of defense, obviously what they've been able to do. So I'm curious maybe if we see some more trickery, whether it be special teams or some different trick plays thrown into the offense. But I think fans are just looking for not even a competitive game, but kind of what I've been saying when it comes to toughness. Go out there and try and not be afraid and try and match physicality. Hit somebody when you can. But again, right now the talent gap is very, very, very off. So I mean, there's not much else we can say about this matchup.
That is true, Greg. Thanks for coming on the podcast. If you could let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter and where they can read some things that you are writing and maybe some of the staff is writing leading up to this weekend's game.
OnTheBanks.com is where you can find all of my previews, all of my my talks about the game, our roundtable predictions, betting preview, betting trends going over each week. And on Twitter, you can follow me at Greg Patuto, simply my first and last name, capital G, capital P.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. We're out of here for this Thursday edition of Locked on Buckeyes. Preview Thursday is over. One more episode coming up tomorrow where we will discuss our questions going into this weekend's game. I'm glad Greg is here with us. I'm glad we could get this preview and learn more about the Rutgers Scarlet Knights with Greg Patuto of OnTheBanks.com. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jay. Thanks for having me.